This is one of those chapters that I have obsessed about for a long time. And at the same time, I feel like, wow, I got so much to learn about it, you know. Let's see where we at.
You just studied that a long time and still not.
Well, and also like there's a lot of things that I'm kind of like going, wow, I think I approached this book in the past, so much just from a, eschatological standpoint, end time sort of thing. But a lot of it has to do with just a bigger picture than, just what's going to happen at the end. And there's a way, this is the Son of Man passage, right? That Jesus quotes all the time. And it's the way that he uses it, like when you read Matthew, you realize that he was talking about the kingdom coming to, him being seated at the right hand of the Father, which he is now. He has been ever since the cross, right? And or his ascension, and he was talking about that era. So when you get to this, when you get to the second half of this, and we'll get there next week, actually, I'm actually going to have to break this up into 2 or 3 parts, probably 3 parts, just because there's a lot to digest, and I don't want to like bite off too much, just kind of like there's a lot of things just kind of reading it over and over again where you're going, oh, okay, I should probably say something about that. But what we're going to do here this time is that he's going to see these 4 beasts in a dream. I kind of like this depiction a little bit just because it's very general. Who knows what that other strange beast is going to be like? But he's going to see this. He's going to see first a lion with wings, and the wings are going to get plucked off, and he's going to stand up like a man, which is like Nebuchadnezzar. And then the bear, which is going to be the Medo-Persian Empire, then followed by the Greek Empire, Alexander the Great, sweeping through Asia in great speed, and then the Roman Empire. But when you get to this part, it gets kind of strange, and there's a lot of different interpretations about it. Even like where people are thinking, like it represents Islam or something else. But Jesus uses that in a certain way. And I don't think it's the full picture, because I do think that there's something going on in this passage, which is already but not yet. There's a lot of things that I see as kind of already but not yet. And there's a lot that I'm just not sure about it, but I'm going to put it on the table for you to chew on. So I'm not going to have like all the answers or pretend to have all the answers or anything. I'll present some different points of view on it. But there are some ways that Jesus used it in particular, and those are the things that we do know. So if you go back to like where we're at in the story, you have an introduction, and then goes all the way to chapter 12. But the middle part of this book, which is in Aramaic, it's sandwiched between 2 Hebrew parts. It's actually a chiasm, and there's actually more than one chiasm in Daniel, by the way. There's different ways that you can see chiasms structured within the book. It's actually really genius. I've seen like at least 3 or 4 different chiastic structures that people have pointed out. This one's all in Daniel. Yeah, just in Daniel, there's like multiple chiasms, and in fact, kind of like what's probably happened is that that Daniel wrote a bunch of stuff, and that other people kind of put it together. There's a lot of different versions of Daniel, actually, but this is the one that ended up in the Tanakh and being kind of like the final version of it. How you doing, Steve? And so if you look at where the hinge point is, and here I kind of like these little hinge things right here. The hinge point is in chapters 4 and 5. And what is being told to you, and remember, this is the story about where Nebuchadnezzar, he doesn't acknowledge God, but then it turns into a beast basically, or he lives like one. And then when he acknowledges God, God restores his mind, and his kingdom is restored and everything, right? Where it's in contrast to his grandson, Belshazzar, who even with the knowledge of what happened to his grandfather, still acts really rebellious, and even takes the temple implements, the holy, the holy items from Jerusalem, and has a party with them, and they're toasting and bowing to other gods and everything. So God has had enough of Belshazzar, and actually doesn't give him a second chance, kind of like what he did with Nebuchadnezzar. But what you know from this whole section is that whoever is in control in politics, in kings, in empires, is from God's own choosing. God puts people in and he takes them out. He gives them kingdoms and he takes away kingdoms. So God gives, he also takes away, and there's nothing under heaven, and all authority comes from above, and he is above all of the authorities that are above. So he rules heaven, right? So that's kind of like the crux here. That's the main gist of the story, and we're going to see that very clearly here in Daniel 7 as well. So if you look at chapters 3 and 6, it is the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego on one hand, and then Daniel and the lion's den on the other. It's faithfulness even under pressure and persecution, and that God lifts people out of that, and that he can do that. And even if he doesn't, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, then it doesn't matter. We will still not serve your gods, right? And then if you go to chapters 2 and 7, it's the same 4 kingdoms that these two have a dream about. In chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar is given the dream by God about an image and a statue that's made out of 4 metals, and then in chapter 7, it's going to be the same kingdoms, but this time they're portrayed as beasts. And if you remember, the head of gold was Babylon in the old dream in chapter 2, breasts and arms of silver, which would be the Medo-Persian Empire. Then the thighs and brass would be Greece, and then the legs of iron would be Rome. And then you have this whole thing about feet and iron and clay and divided nations. And there's a lot of back and forth about what that really means, right? But what we looked at was that the kingdom of Christ comes at that time. And so is it when you get to the feet and the toes, is it a thing that's still to come in the future? It could be. But we do know that after the Babylonian, Persian, and Grecian Empire, that you did have Rome, and that's when Jesus came, right? So there's I still look at it as already, but not yet. There are people who think that everything's already happened in terms of the kingdom being here, and it is here, and Jesus is on the throne. But those things are up for some discussion. But let's look at verses 1 and 2. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. So we're going back in time, remember? Because the last story was the fall of Belshazzar, and it was already under Darius the Mede. So this is going back into the Babylonian time. So this is a dream that he had. This is not in chronological order. In order to make the chiastic structure they've played around with the timeline a little bit,
So we don't think this is how Daniel wrote it in order
Um,
than this put together.
yeah, it was probably like edited, like down the line, and then they structured it. It's the people who did the editing and stuff like that, and it's the same thing with the Torah. Is just and the whole Tanakh. It's just structured in a certain way, and the people who were doing this were thought of themselves as doing it in a prophetic way. So it's not like, like, oh, I don't like this. And they saw themselves as being moved by the Holy Spirit in order to gather the material and say, let's arrange it this way and that sort of thing. So you're going to see in Chronicles things that were in the King's Annals. Here in Daniel, he's got a record of something that Nebuchadnezzar had said, and then he wrote down his dreams and whatever else, but just that whole thing with like multiple chiasms, is that something that's very genius, or is that something that the Holy Spirit genuinely breathed on not just Daniel but other people to do? So I think of it as the latter. So but in any case, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel declared, I saw in my visions by night, and behold, 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. One of the reasons I picked this was that it didn't show a calm sea. The idea is that you have a sea in upheaval. It's chaotic waters, right? And so there's a couple elements here, and normally people will just kind of go through this with 4 winds of heaven, and you got like the great sea, and you've got these beasts that come out of it, right? There's a lot there. First of all, let's talk about chaos waters. If the great sea is kind of like if you go back to Genesis 1, it talks about unordered waters, which are, the Spirit of God is hovering over the waters in the creation story, right? So you have unordered waters, which is uncreation. Things need to be created from it. And chaotic waters that have like become chaotic after it's been ordered something is sort of a decreation. In other words, so when you get to the flood, it's the decreation of that water. It's the unordering of that water, where it's been separated already and been held at bay. The things being held underneath the earth, the waters above and the waters below get recombined, and it's a decreation event. This is common throughout Scripture. You're going to see a bigger picture here with this. So unordered waters symbolize uncreation or decreation. It even symbolizes death, right? Ordered waters bring life and abundance. So when you're talking about like rivers, springs, the not the sea or whatever, then it's symbolic. This is common in the ancient world. So it's speaking a language that people from that time there could kind of understand, right? So the chaos waters and its creatures are sometimes portrayed as God's enemies, so the nations actually start being portrayed as the Bible goes on, especially in the poetic and prophetic scriptures, as being, a churning sea, the nations raging against God, and it's chaos and it's death and that sort of thing, and they're sometimes portrayed as God's enemies, but it's also, in the beginning, if you think about it, it's God's canvas. So God takes the unordered waters and then he uses this as a canvas to make something out of it. So when he recreates something, it's new life. And he does this through chaotic waters, even death. God is always in control. And Jesus, eventually, when you get to the New Testament, he is portrayed as being God, simply by the fact that he has mastery, that's a really weird word for that. It's the wrong word. He can order the waters. He walks on the waters. He even tells the wind to stop. We're going to get into wind here. but he's the one who can control the waters, right? He can take the chaotic waters and say no, and and he's going to be the new life that comes out of water, that sort of thing. Baptism is going to connect to all of this. So the godless nations are portrayed as like a restless sea, chaos waters. Egypt was portrayed as a sea, and even like a sea creature that we know as Rahab. Rahab is a nickname for Egypt. It's not the Rahab that not the Rahab the harlot, but Rahab, which was a seven-headed sea creature that used that lived in the water, and it has ties to Revelation 12 and 13 and stuff. The seven-headed serpent. It was also called a serpent. Living in the waters. Leviathan, behemoth, those sorts of things. In
You believe those were literal?
they're not literal. I think they're symbolic. I don't.
In Job 41, it says that Leviathan is the king of all the children of Thrive. And so that would be basically Satan, because Satan fell because of pride. So
Yeah.
the children of pride are of the seed of the devil.
I think it's
So
messaging.
before fall.
I'm not really sure that I know that, like, when I take it, like when I see dreams like this, or like when in Revelation, I take it as symbolic. I don't know if there was an actual behemoth or whatever. The thing is that what the typical story, like in pagan religions of the ancient Near East, was that that a creator god or somebody would like fight with Tiamat or a sea creature and try to make order out of chaos, right? In the difference in the Genesis account is that God makes everything and puts the great sea creatures in there. So they're like part of his creation. It's like, yeah, he creates them. And then Job goes on, who can tame them, who can put like a hook through their mouth, and like there's just who can tame behemoth, Leviathan. It's it's God having control over the chaos to the extent that it's even his canvas. He can create out of it, and he doesn't have to fight it like you would with Tiamat, or a creature like Tiamat was like in Babylonian literature, right? And Tiamat was also like people get uncomfortable sometimes when you talk about this, because they're like, well, the Bible now sounds like it's like copying ancient literature. It's copying it in a way that it's saying the opposite thing about it, or like polemic literature. But there's also the other element where it's kind of like, I think a lot of these stories that the pagans had were perversions of the things that actually went on. So like what came first, the chicken or the egg, right? And then the more you look at it, you're going, wow, what they were really portraying and saying was very evil, because they were putting, for example, all the attention on the secondary gods. But like if you dig deeper into the story, there was like a main god who they would never really talk about.
So it's all imagination.
Well, some of it's imagination, but some of it's like, well, we're not going to tell stories about like the chief god. We're going to talk about like how great all of these ones that were right under him are, which is idol worship, which is because that God, Yahweh God, had he created other beings who ruled to rule the heavens, who were very rebellious. So it's that's kind of like a deep rabbit hole, but it's in a way, but like it's but you see it there like in seminary, or what do you call it, academia and stuff like that. But anyway, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole or anything, but God creates from chaos, uncreation. He decreates a flood, but he always saves a remnant through this, and he brings new life out of it. So as believers, for example, and I listened to a great sermon this last week, and can't remember the name of the person, but he was talking about like chaos, from chaos waters into new life, which was a sermon on baptism, right? So you identify with Christ's death. It's like Jonah being descended into the chaos waters, which for him is Hades. He talks about it in Jonah 2 as if he's gone to Sheol, right? And then later on, Jesus says, just like Jonah was in the belly of the whale, or in the depths for 3 days, and so the Son of Man is going to be in the center of the earth for that long. And the way that same way that fish could not hold him and spit him out, vomited him out, the grave couldn't hold Christ. And if you look at the catacombs, you had all the early Christians would have portrayals often of Jonah being spit out of a dragon, the chaos water, like they saw the great sea creature that, I'm going to be dead and descend into the grave, but it can't hold me. And just like Jonah, and just like Christ, I'm going to be put onto dry land again, which is new life. This is like heavy in early Christian symbology, or whatever. So as believers, we're baptized into death, which is chaos waters with Christ, and resurrected into new life from which living waters flow. So in Revelation 21 and 22, you kind of see the conclusion of this. We see that there's no more sea, right? You remember that? And there was no more sea, which is one of my favorite verses, because it's like all of that chaos and, like everything you do just seems like it, like if you're not on top of it right away, it descends into chaos. And then at the end, it just kind of like, everything tends towards chaos, like Newton's second law of thermodynamics. If you open your bedroom window during a storm, it's going to be a mess. It's never going to go from a mess into order. It's like there's this constant force into making things like disorderly,
Except for evolution.
except for evolution, right? The big, yeah. So that's kind of like that's just what people like throughout the ages have noticed, so the chaos thing is a big thing, and even in my own life, sometimes I'm just looking at, like things just devolve into chaos so quickly, and it's sort of death. It's part death, it's part exile has a lot to do with that, but so you see no more sea, right? Which a lot of people read that and are going, what's that about? But
Figurative.
it's figurative, but it's one of those figurative things that to me, like once I got it, I was just like, I want that on like my gravestone or like urn or whatever, like maybe on the projector screen when we have my memorial service or something like that, a picture of Jonah being spit out by the sea creature, and then a Revelation 22:1, I think, or 21:1, where it says, and there was no more sea. It's like that chaos is going to be over,
So it's like the last enemy that will be defeated is death.
The last enemy is going to be defeated as death. And death, whereas it's been swallowed up in victory. Tiamat used to swallow its victims, and the grave used to swallow its victims, right? But now death itself has been swallowed up. It's kind of like Paul's using the same language, just to kind of like, because people got that. It's just in the air, It's like if you like there's things that you could say nowadays that would mean something to our culture and whatever. You have to put your mind back into like thousands of years ago and the way people thought. Sometimes it's just language that they kind of understand, where everybody kind of gets what you're talking about, and it doesn't mean those things a lot of times like literally or whatever, but it's language that they can understand because they can feel it. So, and then what do you have in the next chapter, 22? Then you have the living waters, which is again that stream. It's like you have the You have the chaos waters in Genesis 1, and then you have the separation, dry land. And then when you get to Eden, you have that living water that's being spread out and going and watering the earth, right? Then same thing with like the New Jerusalem, and at the end of you get visions of Eden again at the very end of the Bible, where a river is flowing from the mountain of God, right?
Access to Tree of life is open.
Yeah, the tree of life, right, is growing on both sides of it, which I'm not sure how that works out, but you have the side of on either side of the river, you have the tree of life bearing fruit in its season. And yeah, there's so many references to the Old Testament when you get to I believe there's over 400 references to the Old Testament in Revelation.
Just in Revelation.
Just in Revelation.
Also,
Yeah.
also in Ezekiel 47 about the healing waters and trees.
Yeah, that's the Ezekiel's temple that he sees. Yeah, exactly. And then and it's even going into the seas and stuff like that. Yeah. So second word here, raucha, which is Aramaic for it could be spirit. No, it's either spirit or breath or wind. It can mean something like mind, but usually spirit, breath, or wind. The Hebrew equivalent would be ruach, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and the ruach of God was hovering over the waters. And then he made the animals who had the ruach of life. And then God breathed the ruach into Adam, and he became a living being, right? It was the ruach that was blowing over the waters at the end of the Noah story, and you had dry land again. So if you look at pneuma, okay, you ever heard of the term pneumatology? Pneumatology is the study.
Spirit or wind.
Yeah, pneumatology is it's the fancy word that like theologians use for the study of the Holy Spirit, right? Pneumatology, but it's related to the word, because we borrow it from Greek, right? Which is pneumatic tires. It's an air tire, or yeah, because it's air, right? Yeah, or you have pneumonia. Pneumonia is breath related, right? So in multiple languages, what you have is that you have an idea of breath or air and spirit all being used for the same, but all using the same word to describe those three things. And the idea is kind of overlapping, sort of like if you looked at like what the wind does, it's a force that you can't see, but it's moving something, and it makes it like alive, it animates it, right? Like and even like the breath of life that you have, it's something that you can't see, but it animates it. Like Jesus was once asked, where's the kingdom of God? And he says something like, well, the wind blows and you don't know where it comes from, you don't know where it's going, but that's the way that the Spirit of God is. And it's just living and active, and it's like a breath, right? So you have if you look in Daniel where the Aramaic word raucha is, remember when it said that Daniel had an excellent spirit? He had an excellent raucha. It's that word. And yeah.
Right here in Job chapter 34, verses 14 to 15, it says, if he should set his heart on it, and he should gather to himself his spirit and his breath, all flesh will perish together, and man will return to dust. So it's like the Spirit of God is literally sustaining all life.
Yeah, right.
It's so beyond our understanding.
Right. Yeah. So the ruach hovering over the waters, it's the same word. Like look at Google that sometime, and then look at the Hebrew, look at the way it says it in Hebrew. Look for the word ruach, and you'll probably find it. Not right now. We're gonna go through this. Well, you can if you want, but so then the ruach blows over the chaos waters again in Noah's story, and I mentioned that. And then later you have like the ruach that blows over the sea, the Sea of Reeds. Right. When Noah, when Moses comes to, when Moses is going to deliver, he goes to the sea, right? The Sea of Reeds. The wind blows over it. It's the chaos waters, but dry land appears. Okay, dry land is part of this whole story too. It's called the Yavashah. The Yavashah appears just like Yavashah appeared when God separated the waters and dry land appeared. Same thing in the Noah story. The Yavashah appears when the Ruach blows over the waters and Ararat and dry land appears, right? So, and then that story gets carried all the way into Jesus when he gets baptized in the Jordan and he comes back up. Of course, the Spirit, like a dove, just like in the Noah story, lands on him, identifying him as new life. And it's like all those things are connected. So later on, the Ruach blows over the Sea of Reeds and it separates the waters for Israel to cross over dry land. Of course, he swallows up the Egyptian army with the chaos waters. So first, like they're nicknamed the chaos waters, and Rahab or whatever, and the sea creature. But then read what do you call it? The Song of Moses sometime, and you'll see like all of these poetic themes like
Where's that? The Song of Moses?
I think Exodus 15, if I remember. So now think of these four winds. The four winds, these Rauka, are the same words. In fact, there are some places where the winds are either interpreted as winds or spirits in different translations of the Bible, like when it says that God makes his angels spirits, and some of them, in some translations, will say winds, because the word is kind of ambiguous. It's like an overlap in meaning, or sometimes are we talking breath, wind, or spirits here?
Was that the wind in when Moses, no, when they crossed the.
Yeah, it was the Ruach. The Ruach was blowing over the waters and separated them. So then you're thinking, wow, we've seen this before in the Noah story with the dry land appearing and God, bringing new life. But also we saw it there at the very beginning with the Ruach over the waters. Yeah. So you don't see it in English because we translate what we think it's talking about. But when you see the term Ruach and you know that these things are semi-interchangeable, then your poetic mind goes, wait a minute, we're talking about more than one thing here, possibly. Not all the time, but a lot of times.
This is incredible. Like in Genesis 1, it says, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters and let it divide the waters from the waters.
Right. It's the division.
Made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And then God called the firmament heaven. So the evening and the morning were the second day. Just like in Noah's day, when the fountains of the deep and the waters of the heavens came together. And
they collided. It's decreation.
Incredible. Wow.
It's like
I've actually made
it's creation going backwards, right?
I'll show it to you.
Yeah.
Time drawing it up.
And then the same word, separating of the waters of the Sea of Reeds.
And then God's people are allowed to cross safely, and then
on dry land.
Yavashah. Noah's land is safe.
Yeah, it's the interplay of those three concepts, like repeatedly.
And so like those that are in Christ are going to be like enter into the promised land, like figuratively as the Israelites, the waters were spread and then they came down on God's enemies.
Yeah, and Peter even calls
people pass by safely.
Peter also calls that a baptism. He says, he says, which refers to baptism, and he refers to the crossing of the sea by the Israelites, and also Noah and the ark, that was called a baptism as well. So those things are always, often interconnected. So yeah, it's a weird way to think, and we don't think that way anymore. But it's there in Hebrew poetry, like blatantly, not just poetry, but just in the stories, even. So the winds can, like okay, so these four winds, or sometimes they're called spirits or whatever, it's just winds here, you know. Like it can mean something very generic, is like from all directions, right? You know, so it's not like, I don't think every time it means that. However, in this time, it's the wind stirring up the waters and these beasts come out. So it's like the winds have something to do with it. The winds are symbolic of something that's making it happen, right? Um, there are some, so this is one of those passages where the winds are active in doing something. Here's another example. Ezekiel is told to prophesy to the breath to come from the four winds. When he's praying over the dead bones, he's saying, you know, prophesy and say to the wind, to the four winds of heaven, to bring life to the dead bones. So it's the four winds of heaven again, right? And it's kind of like prophesy to the four winds of heaven to put.
So it's almost like God's bringing the wind,
yeah,
the beast up with the wind too.
Yeah, the ruach, prophesy to the four ruachs, ruach of heaven, to breathe the ruach into these dead bones so they can live again.
And it's incredible because in Revelation 7, it says
That's where I'm going right here. The four winds are held back in Revelation 7. It's like, wait, okay, before, so God is going to execute judgment on the world, right? But this is during that half-hour pause where nothing's happening. And he's like, and he's telling these angels, hold back the four winds of heaven until we put a mark on the servants of God. You know, for them assumably to be protected, right? And then and so he's holding back the calamity until God's people is secured with a mark. So there it's kind of like, okay, it's going to do what he wants, but he's like, hold it at bay. This is like, remember when Jesus rebuked the wind? He rebukes it, right? Like,
and the angel of death too, like even the blood on the door is the same thing, kind of, right?
Yeah. The angels that passed over those who had and it's figurative for us because our bodies are considered temples now, and we have the you know the lamb's blood. Those who are in Christ, you know, have the lamb's blood covering.
Are you talking about a ruach?
Well, the angel of death in you know in Egypt. Like it's like the mark on the people, like
Yeah. Okay, you're talking about the mark.
The
Okay.
institution of the Passover, and that was a shadow of the true Passover, who is Christ.
Yeah, when you're talking about like the mark of the beast or something like that, you're talking about like the opposite of the mark of God on your life. You know, it's people are like thinking about like, well, is it a credit card or is it like a tattoo or something like that? No, you know, you have a mark of God on you.
It's like a signet ring. The king puts.
It's right. You're owned by God, right? It's like, this is mine. You know, these people are mine. So there is something about, you know, like the mark of the beast, which is about like who they belong to. You know, so I'm not expecting necessarily a physical mark, you know, like from the mark of the beast. And I don't
seen all kinds of
like on you know, like so, you know, so that's the main, because they're both right there in Revelation, you know. So I don't, you know, it could be, but not necessarily. So
it was weird when I bought these. The guy in front of me was like about 80 years old. You guys might have seen this a lot. I mean, I know you guys might even do it. I don't know, but it just seems so weird. An older guy, and he had his Apple Watch and just
yeah.
And he went like that. Just like, I just got this.
Yeah, it's kind of chilling, you know. Yeah. You know, sometimes like I'm like, yeah, I don't expect like a real mark, but then like a physical mark, not a real mark. There is a real mark. It's more real than a physical mark. But sometimes, you know, so sometimes like I wonder like if when Daniel sees this, right, is he seeing a dream that's kind of like, this is the way that you could see it in the spiritual, right? Sometimes I see it as like symbolism. Sometimes I see it as like more than symbolism, where it's kind of like you're having the, you know, an apocalypse is like when the veil is taken away from your eyes and you actually see what's behind what you can actually see in the physical, right? So so sometimes I think these things, you know, like like it could be a physical mark, but it's a manifestation of the mark that's already gone on in the spiritual world. You see what I'm saying with that? It's like we're not primarily talking about a physical mark. You don't even need the physical mark there, but but if there was a physical mark, it would be a manifestation of what's already been revealed in the spiritual world. And because these symbols, they're not, I don't mean to say that like symbols are less real. All of these symbols and symbology are very real. In fact, they're probably more real than what you would see in the physical anyway. You know, so it's not to discount them. Usually when people think, oh, it's symbolic, then it's kind of like they're trying to soften it or something like that. It's not what I mean to do here. Because yeah, biblical poetry and prophecy is full of all kinds of symbolism, but these symbols are very real and they're about something very real.
It's just like when in Elijah's day, how there was what is it like 4,000 who didn't bow their knee to Baal. You know, so it's like a view of that remnant that remains faithful to God to the end, even through the tribulation.
Right. So I think in a way that like we can what we can say about these four winds, and it's not like I can like nail down exactly what it is, but they're in the invisible forces that animate history and politics, God's judgment, etc. They're, God is in control of all of it, and he tells the wind when to stop and where to go, and rebukes it, and also causes things to happen with it. So when you look at the things that happen throughout history, there are the things that the actions that people took, but there's always that intangible thing, something in the air that blows it into, like that blows over it, like you're going, how did we get into this weird ideology in the United States now? There's something in the air, right? There's always like that indescribable something. It's like, how in the world did that happen? And you can say, well, it's psychology, it's mass psychosis, or whatever you want to call it. No, there's spiritual forces that that are around these things, and I don't want to just say, oh, it's these demons, and it's part of it, and maybe that's the gist of it. But there's always that, like how did Nebuchadnezzar, how did Alexander the Great do what he did in such a short time? With that few people. Oh, we're about to get there. Beasts, finally, and I've said something about this already, so I'm not going to belabor this too much, but the four great beasts came out of the sea, different from one another. So these are the same sections. Yeah, these are the same, like what were sections in the image as portrayed as so like you had the head of gold, chest of silver and bronze, but now they're these beasts. So you went from the statue, this image, to beasts. And it's kind of like saying what man sees as man's image, which is kind of like is going to be dust anyway, God sees as beasts, like these hybrids, these things that should not be, sort of thing, right? And and this is a theme that goes way back, all the way back to, why did you should have ruled over the beast? Why did you listen to that snake, that serpent? The God saying to Cain, it's crouching at your door like an animal, but you must rule over it because you are a human. You're supposed to rule over these things, right? Sin's crouching at your door. So there's been this whole portrayal of, like a beast, and it's a theme that kind of builds up over time through the scripture, and then so if you go back to the idea of like what it is to represent God and to be his image, right, to rule on his behalf, representing him, that's what it means to be truly human. But apart from fulfilling that, humans become like beasts. That's what the whole story of Nebuchadnezzar losing his mind, and he's ruling on, like the way he wants to rule and everything. And God's like, no, you're like a beast. And once you acknowledge that I am God and that I rule heaven, and you acknowledge me, I'll make you human again. Okay, that's you're the image bearer, because that's what it means to be human. So apart from fulfilling that mandate, humans, the human rule becomes beasts resembling the creatures that they were supposed to rule over, but even worse. Okay, these beasts are in contrast to the Son of Man, later in this chapter, the true human, and those who rule with him. So just to summarize this, okay, the sea, the winds, and the beasts, the comparison and contrast to Genesis 1 is deliberate, okay? It's the ruach, or the winds, the ruachs, are creating something out of the chaos waters. This time you're going, it doesn't seem like the Spirit of God, but there is something being churned up here. These are the unseen forces which are behind history, politics, cultures, religions, and ideologies. And these are the visions. These are our visions, the dominion of man and the unseen realm. So later on, like what are going to be identified as princes and in later chapters in Daniel. And all the time, however, God is in control. He is the overall orchestrator of these events. He is the one who gives and takes kingdoms away. So no matter what man does, and even if they're completely evil, God is in control, and he's going to work out all these things for the good of those who are called according to his purpose. And even if they mean things for evil, God means it for good. He has his own intention behind it.
Hard to understand sometimes.
It's very hard to understand sometimes, and especially like during the hardest times. But this is something that Daniel, who's living in exile, has to come to grips with, and he's seeing these visions, and he has to trust God that God is is in control of all these things. So Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, the first beast that we're looking at here is like a lion, and it had eagle's wings. Then as I looked at its wings, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. Who's that? It's Nebuchadnezzar, chapter 4, right? So it's like you're no longer like a beast, dude. I plucked off your wings. You're no longer some hybrid creature. You are resembling a man now, because you've acknowledged who God is. See how this is working? It's like so chapter 4 is the judgment on Nebuchadnezzar to become like a beast until he acknowledged God. And Nebuchadnezzar here becomes, quote, a human, not like a beast, when he acknowledged God as ruler, because he is ruling as somebody who's under God now, or at least acknowledges it. I don't think you have the full picture. And on top of this, Daniel is actually using imagery of Babylonian culture to get this. Well, I should have rephrased that. Daniel is seeing this vision, and it's imagery that he's already seen in the culture over there, which is stuff like this. You get the lion with the wings, and then the head of
Those are called Lamassus.
Lamasa. Yeah.
If you go by the Citadel up the
Oh,
5
yeah.
freeway,
Oh, yeah.
dude, all the statues there are all the Sumerian gods like that.
Oh my-
Yeah.
That's what's on the Citadel up the
Is
5.
that 5 legs or 6?
There's 5. There's one in the middle and the front, and it's just so they could for the view, so you can see the leg stepping back from both angles.
All right.
I've studied these things. It's very.
It's like another like imagery
I
there,
never
like
thought
the,
of it.
the wing.
Spend a lot of time on their hands, huh?
Yeah, but it's
What's
funny.
weird
So
is
like,
Well, how hard it was to get food and make clothes back then. It's weird they had time to do all this stuff too. I'm not trying to be funny. I'm serious. I'm like, dude, just living was You gotta take out like a poop bucket every day probably, but they had time to do all
Yeah.
that stuff too, like it's crazy.
And make hanging
I
gardens
guess
and
they
make
just had
like
slaves, that's slaves.
massive
Slaves.
walls, you know, like, yeah, Babylon was something else,
Just so
man.
you
But
can-
is it really that much different than it?
What do you mean?
We still have time to do it.
Oh, right, yeah.
So things don't change.
Yeah. So it was like a lion had eagle's wings, etc. But the wings were plucked off and he's made to stand up like a man. It's like you're no longer going to be like a beast, or you're going to be like more like a human now. Behold, another beast, and a second one like a bear. It was raised up on one side because you had a lopsided kingdom in the between I said Cyrus here, King Cyrus in Persia. You had a lopsided kingdom between the Medes and the Persians. The Persians became overwhelmingly stronger than the Medes,
Yeah,
you know,
'cause the Persian Empire.
right? And it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, "Arise, devour much flesh." So you again have a picture that like these things are being instructed to do this. There's outside force. And ultimately God, who's like, because God was the one who rose Cyrus up. You see that in Isaiah, Nebuchadnezzar's, Nebuchadnezzar's my servant. Cyrus, I have anointed you, I've given you this ability and the gate, and I've paved the way for you, So, you could say the bear is slower but powerful. It was a big machine, the Medo-Persian Empire. The 2 sides of the bear, the Medes and the Persians, which are modern day Kurds and Iranians. The Kurds are the Medes and Iranians are Persian.
They're not in that group.
The Syrians, the Assyrians are they're up north, and the Assyrian Empire was the one that took the northern kingdom, Israel, into captivity. The southern, which was Judah, they got conquered by the Babylonians. So you still have the remnants of the Assyrian Empire up north.
Yeah.
And then you have 3 ribs in its mouth, right? The bear conquered Babylonia, Lydia, and Egypt. That's one interpretation I've heard. So it's kind of like they had to conquer Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt.
Where's Lydia at?
Lydia, modern day Turkey.
Oh.
So it was told, again, Cyrus was appointed by God, go ahead and defeat, and conquer. Thus says the Lord to his anointed. Yeah, I actually put this down here. Thus says, from Isaiah 54:1. Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus. Cyrus is God is anointed, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue nations before him and to loose the belts of kings, to open doors before him, that the gates may not be closed. God appointed Cyrus. Alexander the Great, Greece. Okay, so after this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So Alexander, he's got like something like 45,000, 50,000 men at the most, and he overthrows Persia, who at its peak, like under Xerxes, had like 2 million. They could field an army of 2 million men. That's huge for today's standards. 2 million,
Because how do you even communicate back then? Like with 2
it's
million
just,
soldiers.
well, yeah, right. You had all these generals and satraps, and but it was quite an organization. Then Alexander the Great sweeps through.
Maybe there's some people up there, like making signs or something to, or do a certain formation or whatnot.
Yeah.
Or like, sign that it's, press it right on it. Hey, come here.
All right.
On the podcast.
So he conquers the known world in 11 years. I mean, this goes down to Egypt, all the way into India, like modern day Turkey, into, this is a huge, huge area. And he does this all like in 11 years. And then
He was young too.
he was young, and he was 32 when he goes, there's no more worlds to conquer. There were, he didn't know about them, but but he laments that there's no more worlds to conquer. And he's only 32 years old at this time. And so, and he's got nobody to leave the empire to, right? And so his generals ask him who he's going to leave his empire to, and he goes to the strongest. And his generals ended up, after he dies, fighting over this, right? These are going to be the four heads. So Alexander died in Babylon, which I thought was kind of like an interesting tidbit.
Was he killed by his subordinates?
No, he had, nobody knows exactly what happened to him. He wasn't assassinated. He had like he went on a drinking binge apparently.
Oh, yeah.
And then he died of some unknown causes, you know, so like nobody knows exactly why he died. But I thought it was interesting that he's in Babylon when he dies, you know. So the four generals that he kind of like leaves behind, or you know, they're called Diadochi, or successors. So this is kind of what happened. Alexander's four generals, they're called Ptolemy, Seleucid, Cassandra, and Antigonus, and the empire divided between these four. Now Antigonus, he tries to reunite the empire that existed under Alexander the Great. But the other generals, they actually formed an alliance against him. They didn't want that. They kind of liked the idea that they got to rule their own kind of corner of the world, right?
Yeah, just be happy
So-
with having your own little kingdom.
Yeah. So then this guy named Lysimachus, Cassander, Ptolemy, and Seleucid, they all fight against Antigonus. So there's four of them now that are fighting against one of the original four. And they beat Antigonus. And so the Greek Empire becomes, first of all, the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in the east, which is Babylon, Pergamum and Thrace under Lysimachus, which is Asia Minor and Macedonia under Cassander. I've got kind of a map here. Where's my, okay, so this is Ptolemy, and he takes over like Egypt. Now think of this, this right here is right where Jerusalem's at.
Mhm.
So they're going to get like kind of tossed around between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. And then over here, Lysimachus, you know, this Thrace is over here, and then what's it? Thrace and Pergamum. Pergamum comes up in Revelation too, you know, but this is modern day Turkey, and then Macedonia over here under Cassander. These, you know, these guys don't really have that much to do with Hebrew history. What happens here, though, it gets really interesting, and we're going to do more of a deep dive as we get into later chapters. In fact, I think it's chapter 11 goes into details about like what happens, only it's writing the details ahead of time. So it's all prophetic.
Where is that in?
And that's going to be, I think in chapter 9, there's some things, but there, I think mostly in chapter 11. And really what happens kind of, well, very generally, so right where they're at, the Seleucids and Ptolemies, it changes hands. Jerusalem changes hands like 5 times, like in a short amount of time. And then the Ptolemies finally take firm control of Jerusalem, right? The Jews actually don't, for the most part, did okay under the Ptolemies. They, you know, they weren't really persecuted that much. You know, it's like, as long as you paid the Ptolemies your taxes, they kind of left the Jews alone. So the Jews kind of lived under a priesthood slash, you know, Hellenism. And there's, yeah, and there's, yeah, kind of a theocracy at the same time, you know, like whatever political thing that arrangement that they had with the Ptolemies there. You had people in Jerusalem and in Judea who were kind of like, some of them wanted more Hellenization and were more secular. And then there was a strain who was becoming more and more kind of like, well, who we know as the Pharisees and Sadducees.
So this is like right before the Maccabee times, kind of?
Yeah, this is going to lead right up to the Maccabees. What happens is, I think there's a guy who kind of, well, to kind of skip forward, there was a kind of bad guy to there was one guy, there was one high priest who refused to pay the taxes, and then they got persecuted by that guy, but then somebody else takes over, and the political forces kind of like, a lot of people want it to be under the Seleucids, but it's under the Seleucids that you have Antiochus Epiphanes come, and he just does a number on Jerusalem. I mean, he was like crucifying mothers with the babies hung around their necks, you know, like that were circumcised or whatever, and they were like strangled and stuff. Yeah, there's different historians have written about this. He slaughtered, you know, he was killing believers, you know, like that wouldn't renounce Yahweh out in the town square, and just, you know, it was like horrible stuff that was going on. Mass slaughter of all these priests, and the stories that you can read in First and Second Maccabees, which kind of leads up to what do you call it? The rededication. No, come on, the rededication of the temple, and big Jewish holiday. Man, I'm just,
Purim.
no, not Purim. Come on, I can't think of it right now.
Passover,
No,
Thanksgiving.
Hanukkah, Yarmulke.
That actually went through my head. I didn't know that was a Jewish holiday.
Oh,
Yeah, no, Hanukkah. Yeah, Hanukkah is all about like the Maccabean revolt, because the Jews revolted and they miraculously won and kind of held a reign there. They're kind of semi-independent state for like 100 years, right? And the Maccabees, they became kind of like heroes, but it's also them who like started like infiltrating the priesthood and were illegitimate priests that like led up to the whole corruption that was Jerusalem by the time Jesus arrives. So it's kind of like they were heroes on one hand, on the other hand they became very corrupt, and they were kind of corrupt to begin with. So that whole, they call it the silent years because there's no direct biblical record about it, but you do have a record of it in prophecy in Daniel, which is very cool. A lot of people are will say, Daniel could not have been written early on because a lot of those things are uncannily, like they became true. The problem with that theory is that it was already translated into Greek before some of those things happened in the Septuagint. Yeah.
Right here in Amos chapter 8, verse 11, it says, "Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord God, that I will send a famine on the land, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord."
Yeah. So then we're going to end with this, I think. Oh, okay. No, the Roman era. So like, I'm not going to expound on this, but like after this, I saw in night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, which we know that Rome came, right? Terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. We'll talk about the 10 horns at some other time, but I want you to take a look at Revelation 13. Okay, you had, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea. Again, you have the sea, right? With 10 horns. So it's this 10 horn of one of the beasts, right? And it had 7 heads with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its head. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Where have we seen a leopard tonight? Like
That one had 4 heads for that one.
yeah, but that is like Greece, right? Its feet were like a bear's. It was like the Medo-Persian Empire.
Like all of them.
It's like a compilation of all the beasts that we read about tonight, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. So it's got 10 horns, just like that last beast. It's like a leopard. It's like a bear. It's like a lion. So it's a composite of all four beasts in Daniel 7, and it too comes out of the sea. And this time it's the dragon, the seven-headed dragon that's waiting for it to come out. So that's kind of where we're gonna leave off. But you see that like all of these things are like connected. You
Maybe
know.
that's the example of like already but not yet, kind of like.
Yeah,
that's
kind
what
of.
this,
Yeah.
like, that's a
I think
compilation of
so,
all the
right.
yes but not yet part.
Yeah, so sometimes like I can point to I'm gonna focus this time around. Last time I focused so much on like, like what could happen and speculation but it's worth looking at, okay? All of those places, when you look on that little map I showed you, a lot of it's modern day Turkey and it's the Middle East, and now it's dominated by Islam. And so there's, I think some people who are looking at Islam have some good points,
Well, I guess the culmination of all four.
there's something going on. A lot of people focus on modern day Europe because it's the Roman Empire. But in Daniel, when he's seeing his visions and everything, he's seeing it from the perspective of Jerusalem and from, he's looking at it more from the Middle East. So, those are things worth looking at. It's always worth looking at Europe, what's going on in Europe, because we see funky things coming out of Europe all the time. And then, but there's a way that Jesus, when I'll give you a teaser a little bit. Jesus, when he goes into his mock trial and he's about to be crucified and go through all that, he tells Caiaphas, the head priest, the chief priest, he says, from now on, you will see the Son of Man riding on the clouds and being seated on the right hand of the Father. And he's basically citing Daniel 7. And he's saying, from now on, you're going to see this, right? So Jesus is already giving you when this starts. So some of this you could say, I would say Daniel 7 probably focuses more on the prophecy of Jesus's first coming and his being seated at the right hand of the Father, right? And the coming of the Son of Man. The coming of the Son of Man happened there in 33 AD, and every time Jesus talks about the Son of Man thing and cites Daniel 7, he's talking about stuff that's going to happen really soon in his time. So, yeah.
Before this generation.
Yeah, before this generation, this generation's not going to pass when you see these things happen. Another passage that came to my attention was that he tells his disciples, I think in Matthew 10 or something like that, he goes, he sends them out to the towns and he goes, you will not even reach all the rest of the town before the coming of the Son of Man on the clouds or something like that. And you're going, oh, wow, he's talking about something that's going to happen really, really quickly. So when we went through our Hebrew study, what the writer of Hebrews is like right between that time where Jesus is already on the throne and the temple still standing. And he says, and him and Paul, they're all talking about like, this is the thing that's going to pass away quickly. That temple is not going to be standing here much longer. In other words, the new covenant has begun and this old one's going to be done away with and it's going to be painful.
And now the believers and followers of Christ are the temples.
Yeah, now the believers, that it's like you've not, all that terminology, right? And he says,
God doesn't dwell in
Yeah.
made with human hands, but he dwells in,
right.
dwells in.
In Hebrews, it says some specific like this covenant which is passing away, or this something which is passing away. In other words, the writer of Hebrews is watching it in its last days that it's going to be alive. But in AD 70, the old covenant's done. That was the sign that like this is done.
And the new covenant is perfected forever because Jesus ascended to heaven.
Right. Yeah.
and he can,
Yeah, so Jesus was basically telling you this is happening now. So what you see in Revelation, where it's a composite beast, then I think you could probably looking at something in the future.
it seems, well, since it's called mystery, mystery Babylon the Great, a mother of harlots.
Yeah.
And since in Hosea, we see that the harlotry was defined as like spiritual harlotry, not being faithful to God.
Right.
So now we're in this new covenant. So like the mystery Babylon the Great, mother of harlots, would be basically the mother of all those who don't remain faithful to God. In the way I can see it, according to the typology of like written in Hosea, it was characterized as being rebellious and not being faithful to God, like they were in a covenant, and just like as in in a marriage or something, the wife, if the wife goes and commits adultery, then you call them adulteress, and then becomes like basically an adulteress and a harlot at the same time,
Right.
and so I see it as being classified as like spiritual harlotry, about breaking the covenant that the people in the new covenant are in with God, that would be characterized as breaking that covenant and becoming a harlot, and then so in Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots. So there's harlot daughters that this mother gives birth to, and so it would be like a big harlot giving birth to other harlots, and the root of it started at one point and then kind of branched off into different directions, but the daughters, it would seem like they would think that there was an all right thing, since it was, they didn't know of the root of it.
They grew up that way.
But yeah, it's hard to put into words. But like, it would be, because there was a lot of divisions happening at the first point when the birth of the church happened. There was other Jewish people going in causing a big ruckus, and then I think it's funny about when Paul's addressing the Sanhedrin, and what is it? The Pharisees believed in the resurrection, the Sadducees did not. So Paul said this, and he started, arguing and stuff, and then they pulled Paul out of it. And so basically, and people would like follow him around, and it says, in Acts 14:2, that the unbelieving Jews stirred up the Gentiles and poisoned their minds against the brethren, and so that created conflict. And then there's what the Nicolaitans, holding the doctrine of the Nicolaitans. So there's other factions that arose, and in Acts chapter 20, verse 30, it says that people will arise, drawing the people after themselves, and so all these different divisions happened, from that early on, and they kind of just kept branching out from that point on. And you got this chaos going on, and all these different factions, and it's
The Nicolaitans. Nicael, the Laetans were like the people, like laity, and Nico is the power. So some people think it's power over the people, like the and
all I know
and
is
then-
that
and
was
then,
a doctrine that wasn't.
but it could also be the power of the people, which would be like what do you call it? Democracy. Anyway, I'm not gonna.
I
Sorry.
feel like you guys are saying something inside. If I take my eyes like away from the conversation for a second, I come back. And I was
Hi, Gary.
I thought you were trying to shake my hand. I'm like, oh, yeah. What are you trying?
You never let them talk the whole time.
No, like
You guys want to say anything?
yeah, you guys turn on
like,
your
"Number
mics
two,
and
Aaron, saying enough already.
I find it very interesting. Like,
I wanted to get,
Never heard
but
of
I'm glad to be past that part. I really want to talk about the Son of Man passages. And that's and honestly, I'll admit I'm kind of buying time a little bit just because there's let's just say I reserve the right to change my mind because sometimes I do.
I think
And,
that's how it should be.
Yeah, I got partway into the Revelation study and go, you know what? Everything I think about this is wrong. Not everything, but so I'm kind of like there's been a reshape in my thinking about Daniel 7 lately, and I'm having to digest it and then check it out and make sure that I'm on the right track. Hopefully. So anyway, that's that, guys. I'll stop recording. in any case.
Thank you very much.